All right, my BIBLEin365 brothers and sisters, we have arrived at the book of 2 Samuel. And folks, I've got to tell you, this is going to be a very short summary, but it's a fantastic book. Now, why is it a short summary? Because my intro to 1 Samuel gives you virtually everything you need to know about the technical facts related to 2 Samuel. So I would highly recommend that you go back there and you take a listen with respect to what I have to say concerning all of those things, and it kind of gets into the discourse of 1 and 2 Samuel should probably be 1 and 2 Kings, and 1 and 2 Chronicles should probably remain 1 and 2 Chronicles, even though you could make a reasonable argument that it could be 5th and 6th Kings. Anyway, a lot of fun stuff about that. You can go back to that summary and learn all I had to say about all of that. But I want to point this out because this is really important. 2 Samuel, if you're going to reference something in your head, if you sort of want to create a catalog in the Bible of all the things that specific books or passages really summarize or give or teach on or really go in depth on, then, which by the way, I want to say this, I highly recommend you look at the Bible that way. Like I highly recommend that you're able to take a look at a book and say, this book has this, and this in it, and then catalog it in your mind so that when you come across an issue that might require some wisdom regarding a practical issue, then you can go to that passage and learn about it. So here's the summary with 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel is, in essence, all dedicated to the life of King David. Now, to be very specific, what we should point out here is that when you look at 2 Samuel, it really carries through the life of David, and the life of David actually starts being documented in 1 Samuel, specifically right around chapter, I want to say 16. It's going to be around there. And then definitely it sort of ends in 2 Kings 2. Now, there's a lot of peppering around, and there's areas of let's go back and look at this history while this history has already happened. But the reality of it is, if you want the sort of the foundational section of David's life, you go to the book of 2 Samuel. It's interesting because 2 Samuel teaches us a lot about King David. One of the things it shows us is that David was not a perfect man. As a matter of fact, he was not only not a perfect man, in many respects, you might be able to argue that he was a homewrecker, that he was a cheater, that he was a liar, that he actually wasn't even faithful to his country. He wasn't a patriot at certain points. He was very lost and depressed in certain ways. In many situations, he allowed not idolatry, but adultery to affect his life. As a matter of fact, speaking of idolatry, King David really wasn't affected much by idolatry, but that relates to a certain fact that God spoke about David, and that was the fact that he was a man after God's own heart. Now, what does it mean to be a man after God's own heart? It means that he was a man that pursued after the heart of God, and he certainly was one of those guys. Now, we should note this concerning David's reign, and we learn an overwhelming majority of this from the book of 2 Samuel, and that is David spent almost 8 years specifically ruling over Judah from the area of Hebron, okay? Now, if you remember, there were a lot of people that made attempts at David's life, and people who did not want him to rule, and people who wanted to sort of take his own rule away from him, including his own son. And there were people that betrayed him, like some of his closest advisors. So there was a lot of crazy things that happened. And when you even read about the story of Absalom, it will absolutely break your heart. It's very, very sad. But David had a very tough life, and he reigned as a king. And on many levels, it was a very difficult reign. But all that to say that within that first 7.5 to 8 years, he ruled over Judah from the area of Hebron, which was believed to be a time that was undoubtedly very, very difficult, but at the same time, it was foundational in developing King David's character. And it's something that we should point out because it really is important. Now, the remaining 33 years of David's reign centered prominently around him ruling over a unified Israel. Remember, Israel stopped being unified after the reign of Solomon. Solomon dies, and then his son Rehoboam rules, and under the rule of Rehoboam is when we begin to see the split between the 10 tribes to the north, referred to after that as Israel, and the 2 tribes to the south, referred to as Judah, right? And that's when the kingdom split. That was during the time of Rehoboam, but prior to that time, it was a unified kingdom that was being ruled, and David ruled over 40 years. Most of that time, literally from Jerusalem, when he ruled over the rest of the nation, and actually was a very, very effective ruler for a whole bunch of reasons. And also, we should note that in 2 Samuel, it documents for us some very specific and insightful things related to promises that God made to King David regarding the future. Okay, now this is really important because when you get into a portion of 2 Samuel, you see this area where King David says, God has this a tent that he dwells in while I'm dwelling in this big palace, and I want to build God his own house. And of course, the prophet goes to David and says, yes, the Lord is with you. And God sort of knocks the prophet upside the head and says, you told him that sounded good, but I was not with you. That was not my word. You go back to David and say, he cannot build this house that he wants to build for me, but his son will. But let him know this, although his hands are too bloody, in order to build me a house, I will build him a house. And the promise, in essence, was that somebody from his bloodline would rule in perpetuity. And of course, that person that he was referring to was none other than Jesus Christ. So pretty spectacular promise that was made. This is where we get some pretty insightful things that come our way regarding a person who seeks after the heart of God. I would say that David's character was something that was remarkable on a whole lot of levels. Although he failed in a lot of places, one thing we did see with David was that he was a courageous man. He was a man that, yes, did have compassion, and we did see that every now and again. We saw the fact that he was a man filled with integrity. He didn't have the kind of wisdom that his son had, although there was some wisdom involved to a small degree. I wouldn't necessarily characterize him as a wise king, but he certainly was just on a lot of levels, and I think it's really important to understand that. The one thing that I will tell you, and I think it's very, very important, is to understand that God had a tremendous heart for David and used David in a great way. So if you want to learn what it means to be a person who pursues after the heart of God, then I would highly recommend you spend a lot of time in 2 Samuel and really intently study the book, because you will learn so much that will enable you to walk with the Lord in a way that you've not walked with God before. And I can promise you it will change your life, especially for you fathers out there. There's a lot to learn, a lot of very insightful things to gain, and I know that it will change your life. So there it is, folks. There's a lot loaded right in this book. Spend a lot of time with it. You do not want to walk away from 2 Samuel by simply just do a precursory reading. You want to spend a lot of time studying it, and I know that you will be blessed, because the benefit you will gain will be something that you cannot quantify, and I know that God will bless you immensely for it. All right? Love you guys. See you on the next one.